Emma had always trusted Max, the German shepherd who had been her companion since she was a little girl. The bond between them was unspoken, built on years of shared memories and silent understanding. Max had always been her protector, the one who stood by her when the world felt too big, too loud, or too strange. But today, something was off. As she walked through the backyard, her gaze caught Max's, a dark, almost unsettling stare. He was standing still, his usual playful demeanor replaced with something more intense. His eyes were fixed on Peter, her father, as if he could see right through him. Max's body was rigid, his ears flat against his head, and his tail was tucked low, a stark contrast to his usual friendly posture. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Max," she called softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. She knelt down, extending a hand, trying to reach him, but Max didn't move. His gaze never wavered from her father. Peter, unaware of Max's unsettling behavior, stood on the other side of the yard, looking down at something in his hands, an old toolbox. He didn't seem to notice the change in the atmosphere around him, or the silent tension that had begun to wrap around their small home like a thick fog. Emma stood still for a moment, watching Max, trying to understand. This wasn't the Max she knew. He had always been so gentle, so protective. Why was he acting like this? Why was he acting so aggressive toward her father? Max had never been like this before. Emma's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. The dog she had always trusted, the dog who had kept her safe in ways she couldn't even explain, now stood before her as if warning her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but what? "Max," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with concern. She took a few slow steps toward him, watching for any sign of movement. But still, Max didn't shift. His eyes, now wide and intense, stayed locked on Peter, and the weight of his gaze sent a chill down Emma's spine. Something wasn't right. But what could it be? And why did Max, of all creatures, seem to know it before anyone else? Emma's heart began to race as the unease in her gut grew stronger. It was as if Max knew a secret, one he couldn't speak, but one he could certainly feel. As she looked at Max, then back at Peter, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The mystery that hung between them, the secrets Peter had hidden, the unspoken tension, was about to unfold, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face it. Emma had always known Max. Since the moment he bounded into her life as a tiny, curious German shepherd puppy, she had never felt truly alone. At 12, Emma had grown up with Max by her side, through every moment of joy, sadness, and uncertainty. He wasn't just a dog to her, he was family. He had been there through the hardest moments of her life, offering a silent kind of support that only a dog could give. He was her protector, her confidant, the one who understood her without words. Max had always known exactly when Emma needed him. She would come home from school, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken teenage troubles, and he would be there, his soft eyes full of understanding, his presence calming her in ways she couldn't explain. There was an unspoken connection between them, something that ran deeper than words. It was loyalty in its purest form. As Emma sat in the living room, her legs tucked under her, she gazed out the window where Max lay stretched out in the sun, watching her father, Peter, as he worked in the garden. Max's eyes followed Peter's every movement, his ears twitching with alertness. Emma smiled softly to herself. She knew that Max was always watching over them both, making sure they were safe. But today, something felt different. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but Max seemed more alert, more protective than usual. Emma's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Peter's voice calling from the kitchen. "Emma, do you want some lunch?" Peter Taylor, her father, was a man of few words. He was a reserved man in his mid-40s, a man who wore the weight of his responsibilities like a second skin. He had raised Emma alone since her mother had passed away when Emma was just a baby. His face, though lined with the early signs of aging, still held a quiet strength. His dark hair, streaked with silver, was always neatly combed, and his broad shoulders bore the weight of years spent working hard to provide for his daughter. Peter had always been there for Emma, in his own way. He was the kind of father who showed his love through actions, not words. He worked long hours at the local auto repair shop, his hands always stained with grease, his mind focused on keeping a roof over their heads. But it wasn't just the work that kept him occupied. It was the secret life he had hidden from Emma, the past he was desperate to keep buried. Peter was protective of Emma, perhaps more than most fathers, and yet, there was a distance between them, a quiet barrier that Emma couldn't quite understand. She knew her father was a man of few words. He didn't talk much about his past, about the life he had before Emma. All Emma knew was that he had once been a young man full of dreams, someone who had big plans for the future, and then something had changed. That something, whatever it was, had caused Peter to close off, to retreat into a world of responsibility, where emotions were buried beneath layers of work and duty. "Emma," Peter called again, this time louder. "Are you coming?" Emma snapped back to reality, rising from the couch. She walked toward the kitchen, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't yet understand. She loved her father deeply. But lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her, something important. Max's strange behavior earlier had only heightened her sense of unease. Why had he acted that way toward Peter? Why had he seemed so on edge? As she entered the kitchen, she saw her father standing by the stove, flipping pancakes. The warm scent of cinnamon and maple syrup filled the air. She smiled, trying to push her worries aside. This was the father she knew, calm, steady, and always there for her. But as she sat down at the table, her eyes flickered toward the window, where Max lay, still watching her father, his eyes full of something that Emma couldn't quite decipher. Peter noticed her gaze and followed it. "Max seems a little on edge today," he said casually, as he set a plate of pancakes in front of her. His voice held no sign of concern, but Emma noticed the subtle way his shoulders tensed as he spoke. "He's been acting strange all day," Emma said, trying to sound casual, though a knot tightened in her stomach. "Why do you think he's like this?" Peter paused for a moment, his eyes flicking toward Max before he turned his attention back to Emma. "Who knows? Dogs are like that sometimes. Maybe it's just the weather or something. Don't worry about it." But Emma did worry. She couldn't explain it, but she felt something was wrong. Max had been with her through every moment of her life. He had never been anything less than protective and loyal. And yet, today, he was acting like there was a storm brewing just beneath the surface. A storm that Emma didn't fully understand but could feel in every tense muscle of her dog's body. As she sat there, eating her pancakes in silence, Emma's mind raced. She glanced over at Peter, who was now reading the newspaper, his face impassive as always. There was something about him today, something in the way his eyes lingered on Max, a flicker of something Emma couldn't identify. Was it guilt? Fear? She didn't know. But she did know one thing for sure. Her father was hiding something. Max's behavior, Peter's distance, the quiet tension in the air, it was all too much to ignore. Emma could sense it in her bones. Something was about to change, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But whatever it was, she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. Max was her protector, and if there was one thing she knew, it was that he would never let anything happen to her. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the window, casting a warm glow across the living room, but Emma couldn't shake the chill that had settled in her chest. Max's odd behavior had set something in motion in her mind, a gnawing, unsettling feeling that refused to go away. It was as if something was off, just beneath the surface of her otherwise perfect life. The way Max had stared at her father earlier, the way Peter had seemed so distant, had made her question things she'd never thought to question before. What if her father wasn't the man she thought he was? She tried to push the thoughts out of her mind as she wandered through the house, looking for something to distract herself. Her eyes fell on the old wooden chest in the corner of the living room, something she'd always assumed was just another forgotten relic of the past, left untouched for years. But today it seemed to call to her. She walked over to it, curiosity bubbling up in her chest. Her fingers brushed the top of the chest as she unlatched it, the faint smell of dust and old wood filling the air. She had never seen this chest open before, not in the years she had lived here. She didn't know why it felt so significant, but she couldn't resist. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of old, yellowed photos and a letter, each item carefully tucked away. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The photos, some framed in fading cardboard, showed a much younger Peter. He was smiling, his arm draped around a woman Emma didn't recognize, and there was a small child with them. The child looked to be about her age, with blonde curls that bounced in the sunlight. They looked so happy, so normal. But something about the photos felt off. They didn't belong in this house, didn't belong in her life. Emma pulled the photos out, her hands trembling slightly. She studied them closely, trying to place the faces of the woman and the child. She didn't recognize either of them. They certainly weren't her mother. She had seen the few photos of her mother before she passed. So, who were these people? And why had Peter kept these photos hidden away? A rustle behind her made Emma freeze. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking on Peter, who stood in the doorway, his face pale. He had always been a man of few words, but the silence between them felt heavier than ever. His expression hardened when he saw the photos in her hands. "What are you doing, Emma?" His voice was low, tight with something Emma couldn't place. She held the photos up, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Who are they, Dad? Why do you have these pictures?" Peter's eyes flickered toward the photos before he quickly walked over and snatched them from her hands. The suddenness of his movement startled Emma, and she stepped back instinctively. His face remained stoic, but Emma noticed the faint twitch in his jaw, a sign that he was hiding something. "It's nothing," he muttered, his voice strained. "Just some old pictures from a long time ago. Nothing to worry about." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. Something in her father's reaction didn't sit right. He had always been so open, so protective, and yet, today, he was acting like a stranger. "Who are they?" she repeated, her voice shaking with more emotion than she intended. Peter's eyes met hers, but there was a coldness in them now, something she had never seen before. He quickly stuffed the photos back into the chest, slamming the lid shut with a force that echoed through the room. "I said it's nothing," he snapped, his voice rising in frustration. "Just forget about it." Emma's mouth went dry as she watched him, her thoughts racing. She had never seen her father lose control like this. It was as if the man she had known for 12 years had suddenly disappeared, replaced by someone she didn't understand. Max, who had been quietly lying by the door, suddenly lifted his head, his ears perked. His eyes, usually full of warmth, were now narrowed and filled with suspicion. He let out a low growl, a deep rumble in his chest that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. It was the same sound he made when he sensed danger, when something wasn't right. Emma's heart pounded as she looked between Max and Peter. Max's growl grew louder, more insistent, but he didn't approach Peter. Instead, he just stood there, staring at him with a strange intensity. "Max, stop," Emma said, her voice trembling. But Max didn't stop. His growl deepened, his body tense. His eyes locked on Peter with an unblinking gaze. Peter's expression darkened, and for a moment, Emma saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Fear, or perhaps guilt. "Get that dog under control," he said sharply, his voice breaking the tension in the room. Max didn't flinch. He was never like this. Max had always been the calm, loving companion she knew him to be, always by her side, always protective but never aggressive. But today was different. Today, Max was reacting to Peter in a way that Emma couldn't understand. The dog wasn't just reacting out of instinct. He was alerting, warning her of something. "Why is he acting like this?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible, the words slipping out before she could stop herself. Max continued to growl at Peter, the deep sound vibrating in the quiet room. It was as if the dog knew something Emma didn't, a truth her father was keeping from her. Peter didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, his back to her, and walked out of the room without another word. Emma stood there, frozen, her hands shaking as she looked down at the chest, her mind racing. Max was still watching Peter, but now there was a softness in his eyes, as if he was waiting for something, waiting for Emma to understand the truth. Her curiosity piqued. Emma walked over to the chest, her fingers lingering on the lid. The mysterious letter was still there, tucked under the photos. She had to know what it said, had to understand what Peter was hiding. Emma opened the chest again, carefully pulling out the letter. As she unfolded it, she could feel Max at her side, his presence comforting yet filled with an urgent energy. The letter was written in a handwriting she didn't recognize, and as her eyes scanned the words, her stomach twisted. The letter was from someone named Sarah. It spoke of a past Peter had tried to leave behind, a past that involved a life Emma could never have imagined. As Emma read on, her heart sank. She could feel the weight of the secret Peter had carried for so many years, and it was heavier than she could have imagined. Max's growl grew quieter, but he stayed close, his protective instincts never wavering. Emma realized, with a heavy heart, that Max had known the truth all along. And now it was time for her to find it too. Over the next few days, Max's strange behavior grew more intense. It was subtle at first, small signs Emma could easily dismiss. But then the oddities started to pile up. Max, usually a picture of calm and loyalty, began acting as if something was amiss, as if the very air around them had shifted. One evening, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, working on her homework. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall were the only sounds filling the room. Peter was in the other room, tinkering with a broken faucet. Emma had learned not to interrupt him when he was focused on something like that, and she tried to push her worries aside. But the quiet was unsettling, the space between them stretching farther than it ever had before. From the corner of her eye, she saw Max, his ears perked, his eyes fixated on the door. His body was rigid, every muscle tense. Emma glanced over at him, a slight unease creeping into her chest. Max's gaze never wavered. He was staring intently at the door, a low growl building in his throat. It wasn't the usual low rumble of a warning, but something more intense, something deeper. "Max," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. The dog didn't respond. He just stood there, the growl deepening. Emma stood up, her heart racing. She walked toward him, gently placing her hand on his back, but he flinched away from her touch, his growl continuing, now more insistent. "Max," she said more firmly, but he didn't respond. She turned toward the door, her gaze flicking to Peter, who was still in the other room. The growling continued, and it was now impossible to ignore the tension in the air. Max, usually so attuned to her, was now on edge in a way she didn't understand. The protective dog that had always stood between her and harm now seemed almost fearful. Fearful of Peter. Max's growl gradually quieted as Emma walked toward the door, her mind racing with the strange thoughts she had been trying to avoid. Was there something wrong with Peter? Was Max sensing something she hadn't yet seen? Her thoughts were interrupted when Peter called from the other room. "Emma, could you come here for a second?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Max. His eyes remained locked on the door, but he had stopped growling, the unease still present in his body language. Slowly, Emma walked toward Peter, trying to steady the uneasiness in her own chest. "What's up, Dad?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of tension. Peter was standing by the sink, holding a small tool in his hand. He looked at her, his face impassive, but his eyes seemed distant, as if he hadn't really seen her. He pointed to the faucet. "It's still leaking a little. Can you hold this while I tighten the pipe?" he asked, his voice calm but strained. Emma nodded, taking the wrench from him and stepping closer to the sink. Her mind wandered back to Max's behavior. Why had he reacted like that? What had changed? As she worked with her father, her thoughts kept drifting back to the strange photos and the letter she had found hidden in the chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Peter wasn't telling her, something big. Max's strange behavior had confirmed that, but Emma couldn't figure out why. Later that night, after dinner, Emma decided to investigate. She couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right, that her father's secret was buried just beneath the surface, and she had to find it. Max's behavior had pushed her to the brink. She needed answers. She retreated to her room, locking the door behind her. She had spent days thinking about the photos, the mysterious letter from Sarah, the strange reactions from Peter, and now Emma opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook where she had been writing down every clue she had discovered. She flipped through the pages, reading over everything she had learned so far. There was something she had missed, something she had to find. That's when her eyes fell on the stack of receipts that had been tucked into the back of the chest. She hadn't fully examined them at the time, distracted by the photos and letter, but now they called to her. With trembling hands, she grabbed the receipts and spread them out across her desk. The receipts were all for large sums of money, all with dates from the last year. The names on the receipts didn't match any of Peter's known contacts. Some of them were from places Emma didn't recognize. But the most disturbing thing was the address that appeared on one of the receipts. It was for a place in the next town over, a place Emma had never heard of, one that didn't seem to have any connection to her father's life. Emma's heart raced as she scanned the receipts again. Her father had been spending money, large sums of it, on something or someone, but what? And why had he hidden all of this from her? Her thoughts spiraled as the pieces began to fall into place. Peter had always been so careful about money. He was frugal, always cautious with their finances. But these receipts, these weren't for household expenses or anything she could explain away. These were for something else. Something secret. Her mind whirled with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. What if her father wasn't just hiding money? What if he was involved in something dangerous? She didn't know how to process the thought, but the evidence was right in front of her. Max's growl from the hallway broke her thoughts. The dog had followed her into her room, his eyes locked on her with an intensity she couldn't ignore. She opened the door slowly, stepping out into the hallway. Max was standing at the end of the hall, watching her father's bedroom. His body was tense, his tail stiff. "Max," she whispered softly, stepping closer. The dog's eyes never left Peter's bedroom door. There was something different in Max's posture now. He wasn't just alert. He was guarding her, making sure she stayed away from whatever danger was lurking in her father's secret life. Emma reached out and touched Max's back, her hand trembling slightly. She felt his muscles tighten under her fingers as if he were warning her. Max knew something and he wasn't going to let her get too close. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. Peter had always been the one person she could trust, the one constant in her life. But now, she wasn't so sure. Max's behavior had changed. His protective instincts were more than just a dog's loyalty. There was something he understood that she didn't, and Emma needed to know what it was. She needed to find the truth, even if it meant facing the man she had trusted her whole life. Max's growl softened, his posture relaxing as he turned to face her. Emma knew the journey she was about to take wouldn't be easy. She was torn between the love and trust she had for her father and the growing suspicion that he was hiding something dangerous. The bond between her and Max was the only thing she could hold on to as she stepped into the unknown. Together, they would uncover the truth. The days following Emma's discovery of the receipts and the strange address had been filled with tension. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, her thoughts constantly spinning. Every time she looked at her father, Peter, she saw him in a different light. A man with secrets, a man who had hidden things from her for as long as she could remember. The father she had known, the one who had always been her rock, now seemed like a stranger. Max had been her anchor through it all, the one constant in her life. His presence had been a comfort, a silent reminder that no matter what was happening in the world around her, she wasn't alone. But even Max couldn't calm the storm inside her. Emma had made up her mind. The time had come to confront her father, to demand the truth. No more hiding, no more running from the questions that plagued her every waking moment. She couldn't keep living in a house where every room was filled with unanswered questions. She needed closure, or at the very least, honesty. It was late in the afternoon when she finally decided to do it. Peter was in the garage, his back turned as he worked on a car engine. Emma had watched him for a few minutes, her heart pounding in her chest. She had rehearsed what she would say, but now that the moment was here, the words felt too big, too heavy. Max was by her side, his eyes locked on Peter. He had been unusually quiet all day, almost as if he sensed the storm that was coming. Emma placed a hand on his head, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her fingers, grounding herself in his presence. "Come on, Max," she whispered. The dog followed her without hesitation, his eyes never leaving her face. Together, they walked to the garage, the sound of their footsteps muffled against the concrete floor. "Dad," Emma called out softly, standing at the entrance. Peter didn't turn around at first. He kept working, tightening a bolt on the engine. "What is it, Em?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that she hadn't noticed before. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Peter finally turned, his face unreadable. He wiped his hands on a rag and set it aside, his eyes flickering with something Emma couldn't place. The tension between them seemed to stretch, thick and uncomfortable. "Sure," Peter said, his voice low. Emma walked into the garage, closing the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, Max by her side, before speaking again. "I found the box," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "The one with the photos and the letter." Peter's face faltered for a second, just long enough for Emma to see the flicker of panic in his eyes before he masked it. He looked at her, his jaw tightening. "Em, you shouldn't have gone through my things," he said, his voice firm but not angry. "I didn't mean to," Emma replied, her eyes locking onto his. "But I found things that don't make sense. Who are those people in the photos, Dad? Why are there receipts for large sums of money, for places I've never heard of?" Peter's gaze dropped to the floor, his face tightening. "I told you it's nothing. Just old stuff. Don't lie to me." Emma snapped, her heart racing. "I know it's not nothing. You've been hiding things from me, and I need to know why. I need to know who you really are. What is all this?" Peter's face hardened, the anger in his eyes barely contained. For a moment, Emma thought he might yell, but instead, he exhaled slowly, as if he were resigning himself to something inevitable. "I never wanted you to know," he began, his voice quieter now, almost defeated. "But you deserve to know the truth." Emma's heart sank as she waited for him to continue. Max, who had been quietly standing beside her, let out a low growl, his body tense. Emma could feel the weight of the moment, could feel the bond between her and Max growing stronger as he sensed her rising anxiety. Peter sighed heavily and sat down on the workbench. Before you were born, I made a lot of bad decisions. I was involved in things, illegal things. People I shouldn't have been around. It was a mess, and I didn't want you to ever find out about it. Emma stood frozen, her mind reeling. Peter had always been the man she trusted most in the world, and yet, here he was, telling her that everything she thought she knew about him had been a lie. He wasn't the man she thought he was. I got into trouble, Peter continued, his voice breaking slightly. I was involved with some people who were doing things they shouldn't have, and I got caught up in it. I was young, and I didn't think about the consequences. But when you were born, when I became your father, I knew I had to cut ties with that world. I couldn't let you grow up around them. So I left. I left it all behind, Emma. I did it for you. Emma felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath her. Her father, the man who had raised her, who had always been so protective of her, was telling her that he had been part of something dark, something dangerous. And he had kept it from her entire life. I never wanted you to know about it, Peter said, his voice low. I thought if I could just leave it behind, if I could keep you away from all that, you'd be safe. I didn't want you to ever have to carry that burden. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, but she fought them back. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep it a secret? Peter looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want to drag you into that world. I wanted to keep you safe, to give you the life you deserve. And I thought that if you never knew, you could grow up thinking I was the man I wanted to be for you. Max's growl grew softer, his body relaxing as Emma stood there, processing the truth that had just been laid bare. It felt like the air had thickened, and the weight of the secrets her father had kept pressed down on her chest. The truth felt like a heavy stone, lodged deep in her heart. Emma's world had just shifted, and she didn't know how to find her footing again. Everything she thought she knew about her father was suddenly in question. She had trusted him completely, and now that trust felt shattered. Max, she whispered, looking down at the dog who had remained by her side, his eyes locked on Peter. His protective instincts were evident, but now they took on a new meaning. Max had been guarding her, not just from physical danger, but from the pain of this revelation. The dog had known the truth, perhaps even before she did, and now his role as her protector felt even more important than ever. Max moved closer to her, nudging her with his head, offering silent comfort. Emma wrapped her arms around him, tears finally slipping down her face. She wasn't sure how she felt about her father anymore, but she knew that Max was here, always by her side, offering the loyalty and love that never wavered. I don't know what to believe anymore, Emma whispered, her voice breaking. Peter stood up, his face etched with sorrow. I'm sorry. I truly am. I never wanted you to be caught up in this. I thought I could protect you from it all, but I see now I should have been honest with you from the start. Emma wiped her tears, looking at him with a mix of hurt and understanding. I need time for it. I need time to process all of this. I need time to figure out who you really are. Max nuzzled her hand, offering comfort as she stood there, trying to make sense of everything. Her father's past, his mistakes, his regrets, they were all too much to bear. But in that moment, one thing was clear. Max would always be there for her, and that bond would never break. The days that followed Emma's confrontation with Peter were filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. Emma tried to go through the motions of her day, school, homework, and helping around the house, but everything felt different now. The father she had always trusted seemed like a stranger, a man whose past had been hidden from her, locked away behind walls of secrecy. She couldn't unsee the photos, the receipts, or the letter. The truth about Peter's past had shattered the image she had built of him, and the weight of that revelation pressed down on her chest every time she looked at him. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore, the bond between her and Max. The German Shepherd had always been there for her, offering protection, comfort, and love without question. Since the confrontation, Max had been even more attentive, his every action a silent reassurance that he would always be there for her, no matter what. And as the days went on, Emma found herself relying on Max more than ever, finding strength in his unwavering loyalty. But as the days passed, the tension between her and Peter grew. Emma found it harder to look at him, harder to trust him. She couldn't just forget what she had learned, couldn't pretend like everything was okay. Max had tried to warn her, had sensed the danger long before she had uncovered the truth, and now Emma found herself torn between the love she had for her father and the growing sense of betrayal that gnawed at her every day. The pivotal moment came one chilly evening, when the world seemed to grow darker, colder, more uncertain. Emma was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun set over the horizon. Max was at her feet, his head resting on her lap, his eyes half closed as if he were watching the world for both of them. Emma absent-mindedly stroked his fur, feeling the calm that only Max could provide. The quiet peace was shattered by the sound of tires screeching down the gravel driveway. Emma's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat as she stood up, instinctively placing her hand on Max's head. The dog's ears perked up immediately, his body going stiff. Max had heard it before Emma had. A car stopping abruptly, doors slamming, and footsteps heading toward the house. Something was wrong. Emma's eyes darted toward the driveway, where a man she didn't recognize was approaching the front door, his steps quick and purposeful. He was tall, wearing a leather jacket, his face half hidden by dark sunglasses. Something about him seemed familiar, but Emma couldn't place it. The man was carrying a briefcase in one hand, his other hand clenched at his side. Max's growl was low at first, almost imperceptible, but it quickly grew louder, more forceful. The dog moved in front of Emma, positioning himself between her and the man as if he knew this was no ordinary visitor. Emma's heart raced as she instinctively backed away, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? And why was he here? Before Emma could move, the man knocked on the door, his fist pounding against the wood with an urgency that sent a chill down her spine. She hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened it just enough to see the man's face. He was staring directly at her, his expression cold, calculating. "I need to speak with Peter," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "Now." Emma took a step back, confusion and fear rising in her chest. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he pushed past her, his shoulder brushing against hers with an unsettling force. Max's growl intensified as he stepped forward, standing tall and unyielding between the man and Emma. The dog's presence was a physical barrier, his protective instincts on full display. "Get out," Emma said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. She wasn't sure who this man was, but she knew one thing for certain. Max wasn't going to let him get any closer. The man paused, his eyes narrowing at Max. He seemed to measure the dog's size, his posture, before a slow smirk crossed his face. "So, this is the protector," he muttered under his breath. Then, without warning, he took a step forward, his hand reaching for something inside his jacket. Emma's heart stopped. She didn't know what he was planning, but Max did. Max lunged forward in a flash, his teeth bared, but not in anger. He was protecting her. The man's hand stopped short, and he froze, his eyes wide with surprise. Max's presence was a silent threat, a warning that was unmistakable. The man stepped back, a deep frown on his face. "Peter's not here," Emma said quickly, her voice trembling but firm. "What do you want from him?" The man hesitated for a moment, then his expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained cold. "I'm not here for trouble," he said, his voice still gruff. "But Peter owes me, and he's not going to get away with it. I'll be back." With that, the man turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing in the doorway, her heart racing. Max didn't move until the man had left the driveway and disappeared down the street. Only then did the dog relax, his body slowly easing back to a more comfortable stance. Emma's breath came in short bursts, her mind still reeling from the encounter. "What was that?" she whispered, looking down at Max, who had returned to her side, his gaze never leaving the road where the man had walked. Max's growl had been a warning, a protection, but it had also been something more. He had known. He had sensed the danger long before Emma had understood it. Peter was in deeper than Emma had realized. This man, whoever he was, had come for Peter, and Max had stepped in without hesitation to protect her. Emma stood still for a long time, her mind swirling with the weight of what had just happened. She had never seen her father's past come back like this. She had never understood how deeply he had been involved in something dangerous, something that had followed him all these years. The man who had just shown up on their doorstep was proof of that. Max nudged her gently, his warm eyes meeting hers as if to say, "You're safe now. I'll always protect you." Emma felt a wave of gratitude flood through her, and for the first time since she had uncovered the truth about her father, she knew what she had to do. She wasn't sure if she could ever completely understand everything Peter had done, but she understood one thing. He had tried to leave that life behind for her. He had made mistakes, but those mistakes didn't define him. His love for her, his desire to protect her, that was what mattered. With Max by her side, Emma made her choice. She could forgive Peter. She had to. She couldn't let the man she loved, the man who had raised her, be consumed by his past. They could rebuild together. She wiped the tears from her eyes, her heart pounding as she turned to face the house, ready to confront Peter once more. And this time, it wouldn't be about the past, it would be about the future. And with Max's unwavering loyalty, Emma knew they could face whatever was coming next, together. The weeks after the confrontation were difficult, but Emma and Peter slowly began to rebuild what had been broken. There were moments of awkward silence, of painful glances, but there were also moments of quiet understanding, shared smiles, and the tentative beginnings of healing. It wasn't easy. Emma still felt the sting of the lies her father had kept from her, the weight of the secrets that had been buried so deep. But as the days passed, she realized that forgiveness wasn't just a gift she was giving to her father, it was one she was giving to herself as well. Peter had been trying in his own way to make up for the years of hiding his past. He had taken responsibility for his mistakes, for the things he had done when he was younger. But it wasn't just about apologies, it was about actions. Slowly, Peter began to open up more, sharing stories from his past, ones that were painful and difficult to relive, but he knew Emma needed to hear them. He explained how he had tried to leave that life behind, how he had cut ties with people who had been a part of a world he no longer wanted to be in. Emma listened. She didn't have all the answers, but she understood. She understood that her father's mistakes were a part of who he was, but they didn't have to define him. They were just chapters in a much larger story. Max had been their constant companion through it all, never wavering in his loyalty or protection. It was as if the dog knew exactly what they needed when they needed it. Whenever Emma or Peter felt the weight of their unresolved pain, Max would be there, offering comfort with a simple nudge of his head, a wag of his tail, or a soft bark that seemed to break the tension. He was more than just a pet. He was the bridge between their hearts, the silent witness to their journey of healing. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Max was lying beside her, his head resting on her knee. She absent-mindedly stroked his fur, her thoughts drifting back to everything that had happened. Her father's past, the pain, the betrayal, and the eventual understanding that had come with time. Peter had come a long way in proving that he could be trusted again. They had started talking more, really talking, about the past, the future, and the unspoken things that had once created a wall between them. Emma knew they still had a long road ahead, but she also knew that the foundation of their relationship had been rebuilt, piece by piece. The cracks in their bond were still there, but they were no longer sharp, no longer a constant source of pain. Max lifted his head from Emma's lap, his ears twitching as if he had heard something in the distance. His body went rigid for a moment, before he stood up and moved toward the end of the porch, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Emma stood up slowly, her eyes following him. She wasn't sure why, but she had learned to trust Max's instincts. "Max," she called softly, but the dog didn't turn to look at her. He was focused, his eyes scanning the yard, his posture tense. Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something in the air, something that felt wrong. She glanced back toward the house, wondering if Peter was around, but the house was quiet, and her father hadn't yet returned from the store. Max continued to pace, his eyes never leaving the yard. Emma's mind raced. She knew Max wasn't just reacting to a squirrel or a bird. There was someone out there. She could feel it. Without thinking, Emma stepped toward the edge of the porch. Max barked once, sharply, a sound that made Emma's pulse quicken. She moved toward him, her feet light against the wood. And then she saw him. A figure stood at the edge of the yard, just outside the light's reach, half hidden in the shadows. Emma's breath caught in her throat. There was a man, a stranger. He was standing still, watching the house. His posture was unnervingly calm, but something about him made the hairs on the back of Emma's neck stand up. Max growled low in his throat, the sound rumbling deep from within his chest. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Emma and the stranger, his body a solid wall of protection. The man didn't move, but Emma could see him more clearly now. He wore a dark jacket, his hands tucked into his pockets. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hood, but the way he stood, the stillness of his presence, it was enough to make Emma's heart race. Max barked again, louder this time, a warning. Emma took a step back, her pulse hammering in her ears. She wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline or the fear of being alone with a stranger, but her body felt like it was frozen in place. She didn't know what to do. Max moved forward again, standing tall, his eyes fixed on the man. There was no doubt in Emma's mind now. Max knew this man wasn't here for a friendly visit. Max was protecting her once again, just as he always had. "Who are you?" Emma called out, trying to steady her voice. She felt the words trembling on her lips, but she couldn't back down now. She had to face this. The man shifted slightly, his face still hidden, but Emma could see the faintest movement of his hand. She stepped back instinctively, but Max remained in front of her, his body tense, his growl escalating into something fiercer. "Stay back," Emma ordered, her voice shaking but firm. Max was the protector now, and Emma was not about to let this man come any closer. Before the man could react, Emma heard the sound of a car approaching, the unmistakable rumble of Peter's truck. The man's gaze flickered toward the driveway, and Emma saw him hesitate, as if weighing his options. Max barked one final time, a sharp, authoritative sound, and the man turned, disappearing into the shadows before Emma could say anything more. She stood there, frozen for a moment, her heart still racing in her chest. Peter pulled up just as the man vanished from sight. Emma rushed to the truck, her mind spinning. She could feel Max at her side, his protective presence grounding her as she explained everything. "Dad, there was someone here," she said, her voice unsteady. "He was standing in the yard, just watching us." Peter's face went pale, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "You're sure? Did he say anything?" "No," Emma replied, "but Max, he knew. Max protected me." She looked down at the dog, her heart swelling with gratitude. Peter got out of the truck quickly, looking around the yard with a mixture of concern and something else, something Emma couldn't quite read. "We'll be okay," he said, glancing at Max, who had settled down at Emma's feet. Emma nodded, but the events of the evening didn't escape her. Max had sensed the danger before she did, had kept her safe without question. He was more than just a dog. He was family. The night grew darker, but as Emma and Peter stood together, with Max at their side, Emma finally understood. They had their past. They had their secrets. But they also had each other. And with Max by her side, Emma knew they could face whatever came next. They would rebuild. They would heal. 6 months had passed since that night, the night when everything had changed. Emma could still remember the rush of emotions, the confusion, the fear, and the relief. But now, as she sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the weight of the past seemed a distant memory. The tension that had once hung in the air like a dark cloud had lifted, replaced with a new sense of peace. She could breathe again. Max was lying beside her, his head resting on her feet, his steady breathing the only sound accompanying the quiet evening. It was moments like these that Emma cherished, the simple, quiet moments with her family. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. Peter walked out of the house, a warm cup of tea in his hands. He had changed too, Emma noticed. He had always been a quiet man, reserved and protective, but now there was a softness in his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. The years of secrets, the weight of his past, had been lifted. He had opened up to Emma in ways she never thought possible, and in doing so, they had healed together. He sat down beside her, the sunlight catching the silver strands in his hair, and handed her the cup. "You look thoughtful," he said, his voice quiet and gentle. Emma smiled, taking the cup from him. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Peter nodded, his gaze drifting to Max, who had shifted closer to Emma, his eyes fixed on her with an unwavering loyalty that Emma had come to understand in the deepest part of her heart. "We've been through a lot, haven't we?" Peter said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm glad we're here now. Together." Emma nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Me too. I don't know how I would have gotten through it without you or Max." Max, hearing his name, lifted his head and looked between Emma and Peter, his eyes soft and knowing. He had always been the protector, the one who had never wavered in his loyalty. But now, it wasn't just about protection, it was about love. Max had become more than a dog. He had become family. Peter looked at Max, his eyes softening. "You know, I don't think I could ever explain to you how much he means to me. He's been our rock. More than just a dog. More than just a protector. He's been our constant." Max, as if understanding the weight of Peter's words, moved closer, resting his head on Emma's lap. She reached down to pet him, the bond between them stronger than ever. "I never wanted you to go through what I did," Peter continued, his voice filled with remorse. "But I'm grateful that you've forgiven me, that you understand. I know it won't be easy to forget everything, but I'm trying. We're rebuilding, Emma." Emma smiled softly, her fingers brushing through Max's fur. "I've learned a lot over the past few months. About forgiveness, about love, about trust. I know you did what you thought was best. And so did Max. We've all been protecting each other." Peter looked at her, his eyes glistening with a mix of pride and sorrow. "You're stronger than I ever knew. You've handled all of this with grace, and I couldn't be more proud of you." Emma's heart warmed at his words. She had never doubted her father's love, but the journey they had been on had shown her just how much their relationship had grown. It was no longer based on secrets and lies. It was built on trust, on understanding, and most importantly, on love. And Max had been the glue that held them all together. As Emma sat there with her father, her thoughts drifted back to the moments of pain, the moments of fear, and the uncertainty that had once clouded their home. But now she could see the growth, the healing that had taken place. They weren't perfect, but they were stronger together. And Max had been their guide through it all. Max shifted in her lap, his body moving with the same grace that had always been his. But then, something caught Emma's attention, something small but significant. Max lifted his head, his eyes focused on something in the distance, and he slowly stood up. His posture was different now, alert but calm. His eyes locked onto Peter and then to Emma. It was as if he were silently saying, "I've done my job. You're safe now." Emma watched in awe as Max walked over to Peter, sitting down beside him with a soft woof. Peter, who had been lost in his own thoughts, turned to look at Max. And then, without hesitation, Peter reached down and placed his hand on Max's head, a silent gesture of gratitude. The moment felt significant, like Max was acknowledging that his work was done and that everything was as it should be. Max turned back to Emma, his eyes filled with that familiar, unwavering loyalty. Emma smiled, her heart swelling with love. Max had always been there for her, but now it was clear that his role wasn't just as a protector. He had helped heal the emotional scars that had once divided their family, and he had brought them closer than ever before. "Thank you," Emma whispered to Max, her voice thick with emotion. Peter watched her, a small smile on his face. "He's one of a kind," he said softly, his voice full of reverence for the dog who had been their steadfast companion through it all. Max's tail thumped softly against the porch, and Emma leaned down to kiss the top of his head. She could feel the weight of their shared journey in that simple gesture, the healing, the forgiveness, and the understanding that had come with time. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, Emma looked at her father and Max. The three of them, once fractured by secrets and pain, now stood united, stronger than ever before. They had weathered the storm, and now they were ready for the future. Emma's thoughts settled into a deep sense of peace as she realized the truth. They had come out of the darkness and into the light. Together, they were a family bound not by blood alone, but by love, loyalty, and the bonds that couldn't be broken, no matter what the past had thrown their way. And Max, ever the silent guardian, had remained by her side, his love for her a constant reminder that family isn't just defined by what we're born into, but by the connections we build, the forgiveness we offer, and the loyalty that lasts through every storm. As the screen fades to black, a quiet moment of reflection lingers in the air. The story of Emma, Peter, and Max may be coming to an end, but the bond between them, woven through loyalty, love, and forgiveness, leaves a lasting impact. It reminds us of the powerful role our pets play in our lives, not just as companions, but as guardians, healers, and unwavering sources of support. We all have our own stories, stories of loyalty, of moments when our pets stepped in to protect us, to comfort us when we felt lost or broken. Whether it's a dog, a cat, or any animal, they have a special way of understanding us, often more than we understand ourselves. They sense when something's wrong, when we're in need of a comforting presence, and without a second thought, they're by our side. Max was more than just a dog. He was a silent hero, a symbol of the purest form of love and devotion. But the story also touches on something we all face at some point: the challenge of forgiveness. Emma's journey of coming to terms with her father's past is a powerful reminder of how forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. Sometimes, we have to let go of the pain, of the things that have hurt us, to embrace the love that still remains. In doing so, we grow stronger, both as individuals and as families. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where your pet protected you? A time when they stood by your side through thick and thin? How did they help you heal, or offer you the strength to move forward? Pets have this incredible ability to make us feel safe, loved, and understood, especially when we're facing our hardest moments. And just like Max, sometimes they know what we need before we do. We invite you to share your stories in the comments below. Tell us how your pet has touched your life and helped you through challenges. We'd love to hear how your bond with your animal has shaped who you are. Your stories matter, and they can inspire others who might be going through similar struggles. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of loyalty, love, and forgiveness, make sure to like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this one. Together, we can continue celebrating the incredible bond between pets and their owners, and remind each other of the healing power of unconditional love. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter what life throws at you, there's always a loyal friend by your side, ready to protect you and help you find your way. And that bond? It's something that can never be broken.